And I've made notes so that if it'd be helpful to have those afterwards, you're welcome to have them.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Art of Intervention Project. And there's certain people, I say, in the country, in the intervention world, that are leaders that lead this industry. And Dr. Landau is definitely one of them. So I feel incredibly honored to interview you and looking forward to diving into your story. I want people to get to know you and the intervention processes you teach. But how would you describe yourself, Judith?
Whoa, that's a tough one. Thank you for having me on this program, by the way. I think it's a really important project. So
thank you.
Looking forward to our discussion. How would I describe myself? I'm a traditional African healer, an Isangoma. Started as a child, thought that would be my life's career, and ended up at medical school when I was 16, and have spent my life integrating the field of traditional healing and modern science, and finding ways of crossing cultures and different family formats in order to bring about healing. My research field is resilience. So how do we access our inner resilience, which I believe we all have? We're all intrinsically healthy and competent.
Right.
And how do we access that to overcome challenges and achieve our goals? So that's been my life's work, first as an academic for many years. And once I had finished my research looking at my view of resilience, my next piece of research was, now that I understand that, how do we find a way of working across cultures that can be translated all over the world, with all of our different religions and languages and beliefs and cultures. And once I had that developed, transitional family therapy is the family therapy model. And it was the first of the integrative family ways of working with families.
Okay.
The basis of modern family therapy. There's an encyclopedia chapter on our website if people want to download it. And then from that, I developed protocols, or tested that until it was evidence-based, and then developed protocols for individuals and families, groups and families, and communities and families. And once that was done, and they were all evidence-based, I took early retirement from my academic position to be able to take the work out into the world. So wow. That's my passion, my identity.
Well, you definitely have taken it all over the world.
The rest of my identity is as a mother, keeper of, absolutely honored keeper of various animals through time. Yeah.
Well, you definitely have taken this all over the world. I mean, when you look at your bio on your Arise Network page, I mean, it's incredible what you have done. So thank you for all you're doing to help this place be a better place for people, and especially in the unique times that we're in right now. The resilience, I think, is such a huge thing that people can focus on as well. And so I know in an effort. What's that?
Let me just add that the other part of my identity is as a woman in long-term recovery. I'm at 57 years, which means a great deal to me, and it's still one day at a time. So
it is a daily conditioning, right? I mean, 57 years, and you're saying it's still one day at a time, and that's all we have, right?
It is. Yes.
All we have is today. And people are tapping into this specifically. I know there's so many things we can talk about with you, but specifically today we talk about this concept of intervention, this process of an intervention. And how would you describe, what is an intervention from all of the years of experience that you've been in the field helping people?
Well, I often, when we're teaching, say to people, "Have you ever done an intervention?" And they'll say no. Some of them obviously have, but the rest say no. And I'll say, well, have you ever spoken to somebody you care about to eat less, work less, sleep more, exercise, play more? And they'll all say, oh, yes, that's an intervention. An intervention is helping somebody else do something differently, whether it's the formal term comes out of the therapy world, where we're helping people change behavior. And ultimately, that's what it is. And it's been adopted by the addiction and mental health world, or the addiction, the co-occurring world, as something specific to get somebody into treatment. I prefer the original definition of helping people change their behavior towards greater and better health.
Yeah, so we're not in this concept, we're not even just talking about just addiction, which we're talking about today, but just in general, right? To intervene on a loved one to change a process. And
Right.
and just a second ago,
loved one, it can be anybody. It can be somebody in a business, in a partnership, a neighbor. In the broader sense, I will limit myself because I know what your topic is. For this purpose, we're talking about addiction and mental health, and I always include chronic or life-threatening physical health as well, because when I'm looking at co-occurring disorders, it can be any two or more of those. The general population still sees intervention in the addiction world as getting somebody into treatment and dropping them there. And yes, it's needed, but it's the easiest part of intervening, is getting somebody into treatment with the help of their families or loved ones or support system. The challenge is keeping them in treatment and helping the entire system get healthy for long-term recovery. And I don't separate out. We call our method invitational intervention because the success rate at the 1 year and 5 year mark is vastly improved if there is no coercion, no confrontation, and it's by invitation with the support of loving family who are also getting healthy concurrently.
Yeah, talk about the whole system, because we're talking about the intervention journey, and it's the whole system, right? So how does the whole system, the family, the individual, how does it all play together in healing?
When people start being addicted or having a problem with a mental health issue, it's not something they choose. It's not something that comes out of the blue. I don't know, have you seen my TED Talk?
I have not, but I pulled it up today. I'm like, I've got to watch your TED Talk. So I have both those videos there. I'm like, I want to watch these for sure. So it's 19-minute TED Talk, right?
Yes. Yes. I'm going to take you back to a little bit of history. So when I first started working in the addiction field, I was very young. I was a psychiatric resident, becoming a child, adolescent, family and community neuropsychiatrist, neurology and psychiatry. And I was sent out of the prize psychiatric unit because I was doing non-traditional things with the adolescents. I was taking them for walks. I was going into their homes to see what was happening with their families. And back in those days, this is 1966.
Okay.
Back in those days, nobody worked with families. And the nurses and social workers said, well, we want her fired because she's doing our job. We're supposed to see the mothers while she sees the kids. And to me, it was, how do you do the work if you don't meet the family and see what's going on in the home? So I started the first couples and family, multifamily groups, couples groups for addiction anywhere. And I was running this very large addiction hospital in Cape Town, South Africa, and was stunned by the vast variety of people who were both inpatient and outpatient. And just couldn't was looking for commonalities. I'm a doctor, you know, there's a cause and effect. So I started this longitudinal study. I ended up interviewing well over 100 families who could, the formal study was 34 families who were struggling with addiction and who could trace their family history back 5 to 7 generations.
Okay.
And looking at where did the addiction begin. And in every single one, it started with trauma, unimaginable loss, mass disaster. And so that was one of the pieces of research that informed my work all the way through. Another was the understanding that somehow our support and connection to family and culture is absolutely core to who we are and how we survive and how we access resilience. So we did another study where we looked at connection to family, how often people saw members of the family, extended family, and how many stories they knew and how far back in the family. And the more connected they are, the less risk-taking, whether it's sexual risk-taking, whether it's addiction.
Okay.
So those are two of the key pieces that, oh, and the other thing was that those stories, when we analyzed them, obviously the more stories and the more contact, less risk-taking. Stories of resilience, the least risk-taking. Stories of vulnerability, second least. The most risk-taking, no stories at all.
Wow.
And then we analyzed the stories of resilience versus vulnerability. And the content was the same. And it was the way the kids in the family saw themselves. You know, we're survivors, we're going to do great, our kids will be okay, we're doing our work in this treatment center, and the others were doomed. This history is going to repeat itself. Wow. So back to that beginning, I didn't know any of the rules. You know, this was early days with addiction treatment. And basically, the chairman had said to me, you know, go somewhere where you can't do any more harm. You're also not going to do any good. And so there I was. I was all of about 22, 23 years old. And not knowing the rules, I said to the receptionist, you know, just when somebody calls, tell them to come with anybody else who cares about the person and invite everybody. So that was just the way I worked, without calling it an intervention, without calling it anything.
Yeah.
It didn't get called, and it was basically the family therapy model that I was developing. When I moved to the States, I met a wonderful man, James Garrett, who lived in just outside Albany.
Okay.
And he was running a very fancy intensive outpatient program. And I was teaching at the University of Pennsylvania in Philly. And so I would go up once a month to consult to him about how to involve families. And he said, the strange thing is happening. All of our patients are coming in. We've suddenly got almost 100% engagement rate. So I said, well, why wouldn't you have? Because to me, it had never been an issue. I was in between. I was trained as a Johnson interventionist, which is still probably the prevalent form, and it's what the public recognizes as intervention.
Right.
But I did a comparison of the Johnson interventions with the way that I was working without calling it an intervention, and it was so much easier and so much more effective working with love, affection, the family support, no confrontation, and no coercion, that I dropped the Johnson intervention, went back to what I was doing. So Jim and I spoke about it, and he said, well, you know, the two of us decided, let's do a study and see what it is. We called treatment centers all over the world. We had my students call to say, what do you do if somebody calls saying they're worried about a loved one? And this was in the early to mid 80s.
Okay.
Over 90% of the treatment centers around the world, and also in the States, obviously, said, we say that we can't do anything until the person calls themselves. So that's where the state of the art was at that time, which I believe is why Johnson did things the way he did.
Can you explain to people what the Johnson model is real quick that aren't familiar with that are listening in?
Yeah, if anybody's watched the intervention show, that's the Johnson model. It's getting the family together. They do a rehearsal meeting that is secret, plan consequences and how to tell the person they really love them, but that if they don't go to treatment, these are the consequences that will be enacted.
Okay.
Sorry, this is a very short summary.
Yeah.
And because it has a fairly high engagement rate, people going into treatment, but because there's the confrontation and looking at the addiction and the person as having them feel bad about themselves and coercing them, it frequently, or in the majority of cases, alienates the person from their family, who are their major support and the most important factors in their recovery. So there's a very high dropout rate early in treatment once people have gone through detox.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. But there are modifications. There's Love First, which is a modification, which is much more gentle and loving. And I always tell people who are learning to be interventionists, learn every form of intervention you can. There are only two interventions that are evidence-based. One which is more individually focused, the CRAFT model, which is a psychoeducational model where the family is taught about addiction as a way of helping them change behavior. And then ARISE, which is a family intervention rather than an individual intervention. And those are the two that are evidence-based, which means that they have a manual, they've been tested through research, and if people are trained and follow that manual, they will get the same outcome results, which is basically, with us, it's 83% in treatment within 3 weeks, and 96% in treatment within 6 months, 62% clean and sober at a year.
That's great. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. Where were we?
We're going down just the journey of the family system and just kind of the importance of working with everybody in the system.
So in my research, finding that the beginning of addiction is always, whether it's childhood trauma, whether it's childhood trauma of a parent or a grandparent, the trauma is not necessarily trauma, grief and loss, unresolved grief. And they're not necessarily in the individual who is addicted. It is often unresolved trauma and loss from generations past that is carried down by the family until it's ultimately resolved. In the natural passage of time, we resolve grief across generations. But during the time that people are suffering, we see suicides, we see addiction. We don't have to wait for the natural passage of time. We can intervene, which is why intervention is so exciting.
It is. And why is it important for people to use an interventionist? Why would you say to families that are considering doing it on their own or calling you and saying, hey, Judith, can someone on your team help us?
You know, I think one of the challenges, we're doing a lot of work in Appalachia and trying to help people who can't afford, formal intervention. It certainly can be done by a family alone, but it's like asking somebody who is in extreme pain to put the pain aside and become competent right now and do what they're most worried about failing at. The family is always hurting really badly and is part of whatever process is going on, whether it's unresolved grief, whether they've been through something traumatic, and even if the family members can't identify that, which they often can't, the addiction itself is enormously burdening. We actually have a survey that it's called Living with Addiction Questionnaire for family members, and we used to have family docs, and it's on our website. We encourage people to look at it because the self-identification of what happens to family members is often a way of them realizing this really is a problem. And so it's really, it's a whole lot easier and likely to be more effective to have somebody guiding. We're currently nearly finished a book for families to do it themselves if they can't afford to have somebody help them. We're training as many people as we can who offer sliding fee scales. We offer a sliding fee scale, and our interns who are in training will often do very low cost work because it's a lot easier and it's likely to be more effective. But I encourage families to, not just to get together and try and do it on their own, but to read. Go to our website, go to other websites, go to the Association of Intervention Specialists. AIS has a summary of the different interventions. Learn about it. Don't just try and do it. And one of the things that happens with families trying to do it on their own, they tend to be so burdened and unhappy that they will attack. And none of us does well when we're feeling attacked. It makes us feel ashamed and guilty, and we're more likely to dig our heels in and say no. So it's learning to do this in a loving and supportive way. And when we're doing an intervention, we always say to the person, if they call us ahead of time, we're open to talking to anybody in the family prior to the meeting. There are no secrets, there's no shame, blame, coercion. And we'll say to them, it's not all about you. We're going to get the whole family healthy, because if you're in trouble, so are they. And often the person with addiction will say it's such a relief to know that we understand that, because it'll be a whole lot of other people in the family that are struggling, and there's one person carrying the load. We also find if they start understanding the intergenerational issues and that it's not their fault, it removes the shame, blame, and guilt immediately for everybody. And when we're not feeling guilty and ashamed, we've got a whole lot more energy to bring about change.
Yeah, it gives the family a chance to speak the same language also.
Exactly.
The language of recovery and addiction and treatment.
Right. And we work really hard to get the person with addiction out of the middle. You know how when a family is dealing with cancer, they talk about that person almost as the cancer.
Yeah.
And we have this horrible habit of calling person the addict. We don't say the heart attack. We don't anymore say the cancer. We used to. We don't say there's the fracture. We talk about a person struggling with addiction. It's not, the person isn't the disease. So the first job we do with our Arise Comprehensive Care is separate the person from the disease so that they can be part of the team of the family and support network working to heal the addiction. But they're not the addiction, they're part of the recovery unit. And once that shift happens, other people's problems can be dealt with. It's not all about the person carrying the addiction or the schizophrenia or the heart attack. And then we can bring about healing with this amazing team.
Yeah, the team is huge. And that's one reason, as you were mentioning earlier, about understanding different ways of helping people, is why I'm doing the Art of Intervention project, is so people can get this broad scope and say, wow, there's no way that would work, or this would work, or just to understand even lay people, pastors, teachers,
yes,
interventionists, to learn how to be better. And so walks a family through this process? Like they call someone on your team.
They call our service line, or they call me, or they call one of us.
What is the phone number or website so people can have that right now?
Ooh,
I got it right here. I have it right here.
Okay, I don't.
I have a phone number on the.
I can tell you our old number. We changed 2 weeks ago, and I haven't memorized the new one.
All right, let's see. I have 877-308-0335. That's on the website. And the website is arise-network.com. So not an underscore, but a dash. So y'all go check out arise-network.com. We're going to obviously keep talking through this process, but if you want to write down that resource. So a family calls and says, we need
We
help.
also have a Facebook page that has a lot of recent videos helping people deal with the current pandemic.
Oh, cool. That is good. So there's lots of resources. Your website's packed with information. But can you talk people through, like, they call the number, they want help?
They'll either call the number or they'll click on we have a little button for people who don't want to call and just want to quickly do a texting or have a 5 minutes of coaching just to help them decide, do they need an intervention? Do they just want some coaching about their emotional stress? So, and then if they're calling for, they need help with getting somebody into treatment, and we get calls for the intervention so let's start with somebody getting into treatment.
Okay.
So I had a call last evening from a mother who is holed up upstairs on the top of her house with her adult son coming upstairs at intervals and really verbally abusing her and going back down and drinking some more. So the first thing for her is talking through what we do, how we do it. Is she interested in working with us? Who's in the family? Who cares about him? So it's not just her, because she's the person really caught in the heart of that problem, because it's the two of them. And it usually is one person who's caught trying to help all alone.
Okay.
So the first thing we'll say to her is, this is really a huge thing for you to be carrying on your own. Who else is there who cares about him? So that we can start moving her into having support that will also be part of the intervention and healing him.
Okay.
And then we get a list of friends, family, other people, and we talk about, let's set up a meeting. We work in 6-month contracts, because often when people have started, they say, okay, we've got what we need, we don't want to go on. And we find that doing it in 6-month contracts, we know that we can get them through the crisis into comprehensive continuing care. And often they'll go on for a year or a year and a half, but 6 months is our minimum.
Okay.
And so then we'll suggest to the person that we have this list of wonderful people who care. Now let's look at how do we invite them. And we'll coach the first caller or that concerned other person to invite everybody in the family to come to one meeting. We don't push for more than that at the beginning.
Okay.
And then we'll say, now, who in this group would be best to invite your son? Right? And I had a call from a 12-year-old worried about her father.
Wow.
We're obviously not going to have a 6-month contract with a 12-year-old. So with the 12-year, and it's not uncommon for a child to call.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The child was dealing with father was passing out, mom was working full time, dad was home, working from home, and a lot of the time just on the couch. And there were younger kids who weren't being neglected. So with her, it was a question not of who else is in the family, but who is there of the elders in the family who we might get on the phone with you so that we can start working. And it was actually her mother's mother.
Wow.
Was the resource. So it's always that delicate discovery of where the resources are, who can help, who's concerned, and getting as many of them as possible to the first meeting. And we don't limit numbers. Typically, it's between 5 and 12 people. I have done it with over 100, but the typical is a smaller group. And one of the other things we did in research was look at how many members of the artificial or ancillary support system, professionals, social workers, etc., does it take to replace one family member? 5.
Okay. Wow.
So when we get a call and the person says, well, we've got so and so and so, and you've got this slew of people from the professional system and very few family members. So we have to mobilize the family. And that sometimes is an effort. But that's our main thrust with the first call.
Okay.
And then people come to the first meeting, which is the beginning of comprehensive care. And we talk about everybody, not just the individual. The focus is, and we say to them, the focus is on you. You know, you're the person who has volunteered to bring the family together. Thank you for bringing them.
Right.
You know, because clearly this is a family that needs help. But we're going to ask everybody what they want to have. What are their goals? What do they want to have happen? What are their concerns? Let's move forward and set up meetings. And during that first meeting, about 60% of our people struggling with addiction or mental health issues agree to go to treatment. And then we just continue with comprehensive care meetings. If they don't agree, we shift into intervention mode, what we call a level 2, because the first meeting would be level 1 if we're thinking intervention. And level 2 is strength in numbers. Who's not here who in this meeting who could be helpful? We enlarge the system, and we're now looking at making sure that we have 3 generations if possible, so that we have different ages and an insight further back into the family. And we make sure that we have more than 5, at least 5 people. Actually, the cutoff number in a yes, no, going to treatment, not going to treatment is actually 3.5. So we have to have 4.
Okay. Yeah.
But and then level 2, we get another 24% going into treatment. If that, and once they're in treatment, we stay involved in comprehensive care. We're on the phone weekly with the treatment center, with the counselor, and with the person of concern, and the family, so that this continues with the family being an integral part of the treatment, so that when they're discharged, we're part of the discharge planning, and we continue for a minimum of 6 months. And before we stop, family members are chairing those meetings, so that we're slowly withdrawing and knowing that they can do the meetings themselves.
Okay.
So it's an adjunct. We encourage everybody to go to support groups, 12-step meetings, whichever meeting it is that is appropriate. And we get calls from people 3-4 years later saying, I had one 10 years later, saying we were having our monthly, they're down to monthly, we're having our monthly family meeting, and we've got a crisis with whether or not to put grandma into an old age home. Could you please join our next meeting?
Oh, wow.
So they keep working as a family in recovery.
That's wonderful. I mean, 10 years later, that's crazy. What I hear a lot is empowering. You're empowering people to be in the process together as a team and say, man, we got to unify. So that's really great.
And that's why we encourage people to use an interventionist, because if they start a meeting on their own and fail, it's demoralizing, and they may be in for another cycle. And, it breaks my heart when I meet people who've gone through 6 interventions and done a lot of it on their own, been confrontational, and we've just watched the deterioration, because it's so much easier to work with caring and support, and from a positive perspective. Easier for everybody, us included.
Yeah. Well, especially from the person suffering from, again, whether substance abuse or mental health, they were invited in this process, and it's kind of like, hey, we're here to help. If you're not ready, we know that there's, again, this process piece. So let's say, loved one decides, says, hey, I'm willing to go to treatment.
Yes.
Okay. How do you define what is treatment?
Treatment in our definition is any major change. It's going to meetings, going to 12-step meetings. It's changing behavior with assistance. So, starting to go, we don't insist on inpatient treatment unless it's needed. And I think one of the myths out in the world is that treatment is inpatient, treatment's residential. Only 13% of people in the US receive residential treatment. 13% of people receiving treatment receive residential treatment. Our statistics with ARISE match the statistics of the treatment world. So about 13% go inpatient or residential. The majority of people receive outpatient treatment, whether it's a doctor, an addiction counselor, a therapist, a psychiatrist. Then we have a block of people who are running around 20 to 30% who do intensive outpatient, which is a wonderful program. It's available all over the country. There are many resources that are affordable. And, when we're working with people who can't afford to go residential, the intensive outpatient option is really useful. And we will often couple that with outpatient work. And there are affordable residential programs. Money is not what it's all about. The person I was speaking to last night she's in her 80s. And thought the treatment had to be $40,000 to $80,000 a month. It doesn't. There are excellent treatment programs, outpatient, intensive outpatient, residential, that are affordable.
Right.
And we have on our website, we have buttons to resources. So money should never be what stops one getting somebody you love healthy.
And that's the nice thing about now. I think about back when you were starting these, you were talking about back in the beginning, there weren't all these options, right? And now we have so many options. I mean, even doing virtual.
Absolutely.
Virtual, whatever it looks like.
We are right now with the pandemic. We've been doing virtual work for many years, but it's driving everybody to realize that one doesn't have to fly at expensive rates, and one can do a lot of work. We do almost all of our comprehensive care meetings on video conference. We used to do them on the phone. We now have the luxury of video, because it means we can involve people who are bedridden, elderly, and living in different. I had one family where we had a family member in Japan, one in Taiwan, one in Thailand, one in New Zealand, two in New York, two in Florida, and one in England.
Okay.
We could do our weekly meetings. We were able to do the work perfectly well.
Yeah, and we can sit here and have our coffee like we're having now, or our water, whatever it is, right? And have those conversations. And so you've worked with thousands of people over the years, and you said you're 57 years in recovery. I'm 18 years in recovery from substances, but thank you. Yeah, it is a daily reprieve, right? So how would you describe like some of your clients, your families, talking about this word like transformation? How does that word resonate with you in the recovery world of a transformed life?
For me, a transformed life is removing the shame, blame, and guilt, really finding out why we're here, having that light go on that tells us that we matter and that we can make a real difference in the world. And for me, the true transformation is when everybody in the family shares that and knows that they have a mission, that we're here for a reason. And to me, that's the essence of transformation. I was very lucky personally. I had my first near-death experience at 3, and wanted to go back. I was delighted to meet the other side, and wanted to stay. And I was told to look back at my parents and think about them and why I had chosen to come.
Wow.
And any time that I've gone off the path, I have another wake-up experience. So I've been very fortunate at being kept on the path of transformation, because it's hard. We're human. We have all the human frailties and the temptations, and And it's hard remembering that we are here for a purpose, and that, whatever our spiritual beliefs are, we're all here for a reason. And I think having that awakening and the importance of our relationships with family members and with other human beings and our planet, because that's what's going to get us through this pandemic. It has got us through, if we go back a century or so, it got us through tuberculosis, polio, and multiple epidemics, HIV, AIDS. We've survived as a human race. And we start being threatened when we're not listening.
Yeah, and in isolation, right? Addiction is all about isolation, and this whole, if people, depending on when you're watching this video, we're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic around the whole world right now, and it's really isolating people, which is what addiction does. It isolates us, and
yes,
different levels of brokenness.
Yeah, I just did a little video piece on how important it is now, with our remedy being isolation, how important it is for us to stay connected, and because connection is what stops us from risk taking. So this is an awakening, and it's wonderful watching how people are reaching out and connecting through social media, calling, being home from work, calling people they haven't spoken to for years, sharing what they're doing while they're home. All of these silly little things that keep us connected.
Yeah, we have to stay together, and and thinking about kind of like the recovery world and people that are out there that are now kind of being isolated and even doing interventions. I'm sure there's a challenge there with people of traveling and flying and getting their loved one in to help. So when you talk about like a treatment program,
yes,
can you tell people like what maybe makes a good treatment center that you might refer to? What are your qualifiers to look at?
Well, the first thing is I want to know that they're licensed.
That's a good one. Yeah.
And unfortunately, there have been a number of programs that aren't properly licensed. I think part of it is knowing that if one's dealing with co-occurring disorders, it's important to have a program that has a psychiatrist and that has a mental health license, and it's not just a 12-step focused on substances. So identifying the program as as what we need. Talking to them, finding out about the price range and whether or not one has insurance to match, because sometimes people get caught because they feel that they've got to be at the very best one, and they're judging best by money, and best is not necessarily money. We only work with treatment programs that will collaborate with us. And we insist at entry that the person signs a form saying, if I want to leave against medical advice, I give permission for not to be given the form until my interventionist and a family member have been called. Because then we get the family together, we do more secondary interventions than we do primary. And we're often called in to help mobilize the family because they weren't involved at the beginning. So I want to know that they will, when the person's through detox or fully, properly joined with the treatment center, and they feel it's time, that they will participate with us in our comprehensive care meetings, and that will be involved in discharge planning, because there are a number of treatment centers that go into isolation with a client, believe that they've done everything that's needed, discharge them out into the blue, and they relapse. So we want to know that they're going to collaborate with a continuum of care. We want to know that there is an understanding of underlying issues, that they are aware of the importance of doing trauma work, that they have the resources needed. Often there are, I think because there was a time where people felt they could make a lot of money through treatment, there were a number of treatment centers that were providing less than adequate care. I went to one of my team has visited and approved every treatment center that we have a sponsorship program because we do training.
Okay.
Our sponsors are all invited, or if they apply, then we vet them very carefully, because once they're on our website as sponsors, the public knows and our trainees know these are places we can use. So we review them regularly. And I went to visit a treatment center that had applied to be a sponsor. And there were people wandering around the lawn, and there was a swimming pool, and we couldn't find a professional. And we asked a couple of the clients, and they said, we don't know where they are.
Wow.
We wandered through the building in the offices, and they are fortunately now out of business. But, so I look at the staffing pattern. I want to know that they've got the staff to do what they say they're doing. If it's a mental health issue, are you licensed? There's a trick to that. People will say we are licensed to do psychiatric care, to do mental health, or they'll say we're dual diagnosis capable. And dual diagnosis and co-occurring disorders are interchangeable language.
Okay.
And capable means they think they can treat, but they're not licensed. If I've got someone with a serious mental health issue or an eating disorder, I want to know that they are licensed to provide that care, and that they have not a part-time psychiatrist coming in once a week.
Right.
So, but a full mental health team. So same with detox. I want to know that if they're providing their own detox, they have trained staff for detox. And a decent environment. I've seen some horrible places that feel like prison cells. And it's not necessary. Nobody needs to be, because that's what makes us feel bad about ourselves. We don't punish people for being sick.
Right.
We get them healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And another reason why it's important to use someone like yourself on your team, because to just call an 1-800 number and say we need someone that needs treatment, and they send them somewhere, and it's like, hey, nice pictures, but the pool actually is filled with dirt. And I mean, all these things. So it's important to know where you're sending your loved one, to have someone that
checking the accreditation. Do they have Joint Commission? What are their accreditations? What are their licenses? I don't want to see a program where, now, if it's a first admission, and it's an adult, and they're just struggling with early alcoholism, they don't have to have very high-powered staff. They have to have addiction counselors who are qualified. I think the public is not aware that an addiction counselor is not a clinician. Licensed clinicians are trained to work with mental health and addiction. An addiction counselor with a master's in addiction counseling is trained to work with substance abuse. Typically not with eating disorders, not with mental health issues. So just looking at the credentials, knowing that, for me, I want them to be members of the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers, NATAP. I want them to belong to organizations. I want them to have all the accreditations, including Joint Commission. I want to know that they are connected to their community, and not just they've pirated in, charging a lot, and don't care about what's going on outside. And I want to know that they are connected and know about ways of offering their clients continuing care. Are they connected with day treatment, with intensive outpatient programs, with outpatient programs and sober living, that when they do step down, there is a continuum that's provided.
Right.
And I don't care if it's not provided by a small treatment center, but they need to say to me, this is what we offer our clients when they leave here. Now, when they're working with us, we can do that for them. But a good treatment center, if you're not working with an interventionist, it's critical that they will explain, this is what we do for our continuum of care. Right?
Definitely, because I
So
said the
that,
step down, that's the
yeah,
long-term plan for people.
yeah, it really is. And then knowing whether it's, being able to talk to their insurance person. Otherwise, talk to your own insurance person and find out, are they in network or out of network? Are they for profit or non-profit? People aren't aware there are wonderful non-profit treatment centers that do superb work. It's not necessarily the best is the most expensive.
Right.
The expense typically goes to the frills. Are you going to get a room of your own? Are you going to have a massage? Are you going to be able to keep your computer and your phone? Those are the frills.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know that the treatment team is excellent. And it's the same when one looks at sober living homes. What happens if the person enrolls? Is there who gets the money? Unfortunately, we're living in a time where there have been enormous infringements of ethics, where there have been sober living homes that have recruited patients from 12-step meetings.
Oh, yeah.
And where there are kickbacks and money changing hands. And that's important, because if they're doing something unethical, their care is not going to be adequate because their focus is on money, not on healing.
And you really want the best shot for your loved one and the family let's just say the first time, maybe, we want to have the right things in place
Mm-hmm.
to really help for the biggest success. So maybe you don't have to go through this again.
Right. Well, and making sure one doesn't have to go through it again, having the family involved is key. So finding out from them, do they have a family program? Now, the family program has an interesting history. There were a bunch of us doing research through the 70s and 80s, and there was no question that involving family gets people into treatment, keeps them there, and keeps them in long-term recovery. The length of stay completing treatment correlates directly with long-term outcome. And the primary factor getting people into treatment is family and loved ones. Keeping them in treatment is family and loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And long-term. So if we can keep them in long-term care, we're keeping people healthy and preventing relapse. We're not going to prevent relapse entirely, but preventing relapse and making those relapses as short as possible. The relapse rate for addiction is the same as any other chronic or life-threatening illness. It's the same percentage as asthma, diabetes, and we forget that this is a chronic relapsing illness. We're not looking at perfection. We're looking at a chronic relapsing illness and hopefully fewer relapses for shorter time.
Amen to that.
Right? So with our 62% clean and sober, we have another 10% who have relapsed and come back. So 10% improved. So we're at 72% if we include the fact that it's a chronic relapsing illness. And I think the myth of you'll come to our treatment center and you'll be cured is a very dangerous thing because I'm a cancer survivor as well. We don't get cured. We're in remission. And I think we're in remission or we're in recovery. And, I believe that the big book was guided. I believe it was guided writing. And that if it were being written today, it would be a little different. Yeah. Because I think the identification of ourselves as addicts goes against all that I believe in terms of, if we're looking at language as a catalyst for change, if we talk about ourselves as addicts, we are aware all the time that there's something wrong. Whereas if, I will always say in a meeting, I'm a woman in long-term recovery. Because to me, that's the hopeful piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And, we actually, I really believe the book was guided because we wrote a paper that's downloadable on our website, looking at the regions of the brain that we now understand. And each region matches one of the 12-step slogans.
I had no way. I got to read that. That sounds amazing.
Got to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, I will. I will download that when we're done here.
It absolutely matched. It was really fun. I did it with Jim Garrett. It was really fun. Yeah.
Was your mind kind of going like, mind blown as you kind of went through that?
Absolutely. It was wild. Yeah. 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 We lost Jim a couple of years ago. It was really tragic. He co-authored the book, the Arise book with me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Wonderful.
sorry for your loss there. That had to be a hard one.
Yeah. Yeah. He was amazing. Trying to think about other things about, I think, another one for treatment centers is how often do they do drug screens? Now, I think the drug screen scam is almost over, but I don't quite trust it yet. And there were treatment centers who were doing drug screens daily. One doesn't need to do them more than 2 or 3 times a week, especially if somebody's residential.
Right, yeah.
Or even not. I mean, I never do them more than 2 or 3 times a week. And they were charging a fortune. People were paying, I think it was patients were paying $10,000 to the treatment center for drug testing, which is about 10 cents a time. And there were interventionists who had contracts with treatment centers to do monitoring while they're inpatient. In other words, offering the drug screens. It was really bad.
Yeah. There's definitely been a lot of exposure over the years. Like I said, a lot of things are shutting down that should be shut down. And ones that are still in are getting more heightened, even like sober livings and stuff of just the regulations and things that are trying to be imposed by state. So there's a lot of positive change going on for sure.
Which is really important.
Yeah.
You know, I think, and it's the same with sober living, being really careful and call resources, call people. I refuse, people will often ask me for references. Can they speak to former clients? I don't do that. I'm a physician and I'm bound by confidentiality, but I give them questions to ask,
That is very good. So someone that's listening right now and watching or listening, the beautiful thing of multimedia is what would you say to them? They're listening. They're like, gosh, I love the fact that people can text and do things on your website that way. But what would you say to just kind of encourage them to take that step to make the call or go online to get a texting thread started with somebody?
Think about it as going online to a browser where you're just exploring and asking questions, and there's no obligation. We don't charge. We'll talk with you more than once if needed. We are not short of work. We will send you to the resources that we think are best for you. And there's really nothing to be concerned about because it's just a neutral person sharing information. And what I think is sometimes helpful, I will suggest to people who are anxious about calling, write down a few questions so that you don't feel, what am I going to say if they pick up? We have a number of calls where the call will happen, we'll pick up, and there's dead air. I mean, we know that people are anxious.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big step making that call. So congratulations if you're thinking about doing it, but go ahead and do it. I promise there will be no coercion, no confrontation, no obligation, and no charge. We're here as a resource. We're not just here to get you into paying for an intervention or for therapy or for coaching or for companionship or anything else. We'll let you know what we think is right. And probably a good 80% of the people who call us for some kind of service, we refer out because we're not right, somebody else would be better. So please remember, it's free, there's no obligation, and nobody's going to judge you. We're just here to help.
There you go, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Judith Landau. I'm going to give that number out again. It's 877-308-0335, or just go to arise-network.com and just take that step, y'all. So thank you so much for your time. You're an amazing woman. You're doing great work around the world. And I just thank you for answering the call to move into what you have done and are continuing to do. Thank you, Robin. Thank you for what you're doing. And I look forward to hearing more about it and seeing it. Yeah. We'll be wrapping it up here soon for sure. So thanks again. You have an amazing day today and be safe.
You too, and hope we meet in person one day.
I would love that for sure.